So today we're going to be talking about the two main English exams. That's the TOEFL and the IELTS. These are very important. They're highly requested within the practice. And even if your student is not currently striving to do well on one of these exams, I think what you learn today will be useful, and I'll explain why. And maybe your student can set this as a goal, because you can use it to communicate to many different people that I have this ability, and here's my proof, and that can open up a lot of doors. All right, so moving on. Finally, I wanted to congratulate myself. I broke 100,000 minutes of teaching English online, which is kind of nice. So that's with 1,208 different students. With that, if they fire me, everything's okay. At least I broke 100,000. Okay, today's game plan. Why focus on exams? So what are the benefits? Why is it in demand? Then we'll do a side-by-side overview of the two types, their main features. Then we'll do an in-depth examination of these exams, because the tasks which are contained within are really what's useful for us as tutors and educators. We might be able to adapt them to our lessons. All right, then I'll give you some quick tips. We won't have much time at this point, but I'll point you to where you can go next to develop what you learned, and we'll go through a summary. Okay, so why such a focus on exams? In the first place, just from mastery, so whether or not you actually could benefit from having the score. This is a tangible and measurable goal. The tasks are well described, which means you can understand what you need to do to prepare for it, and they're real skills. So I've made a point before that English is something that's incredibly practical. I should say language in general is something that's incredibly practical. So if you can do these tasks, I think it will help you no matter what you're doing in your life, or whatever your communication needs are. And then as far as availability of exams, practice materials, you can buy books. You can go on websites and get exercises, which will help you. So whether or not you're actually preparing for the exam, those things exist. Then from the professional standpoint, these exams are recognized by tens of thousands of organizations worldwide. I would say more. Basically, these are the two. There may be others, but these are the ones which people will ask about. So no matter what university you're trying to go to in the world, these are the ones that you could report to them. This is my score. I'm at this level for English, and so on. So it's an admission requirement, usually for universities. In fact, this is how they were first developed, or I should say their purpose was as an admission requirement to universities in the United States, though now they're accepted everywhere. But they were adapted for employment purposes and also visa purposes. So if you wanted to get, say, a student visa to attend university in the UK, I don't know the system, but it seems that if you wanted to be in the country while you're searching for a university, for example, you could apply for the visa with a tier of benefits based on your score. Right, and these might be tied to salary also. One of my students from Vietnam was preparing for a different exam, closely related, but if he got a higher score, his salary would go up. Okay, and like I said, this is standardized, so everyone knows exactly what it means when you show the score. So what if you say my student has no intention to take the exam? Well, you can still measure progress. So if you want to know how much progress have you made over the year, you can take the exam. There is a fee. Okay, so it's not for free, but if you wanted to measure progress at any point, you could take the exam. And while I have it clearly in my mind, because I know I didn't write it later, the fee for the TOEFL exam is $180. The fee for the IELTS exam is $250. Why is it more expensive? I could theorize, though I don't know exactly why. Okay, and the design and content of these exams are a good measure of real skills, as I was saying before. So if you're striving for these and maybe you don't want to pay, you could still take a practice exam. So that's a goal that will transfer whatever skills you gain from that to whatever communication needs you have in real life. Okay, so you're killing two birds with one stone. One, you're improving English, and two, maybe you decide later that you want to take this exam, or you discover a job opportunity, and there happens to be a barrier, which is you need to report your TOEFL score. And oh, well, great, you've been preparing, so you know exactly what to do for the exam. Because exam taking is a skill itself. So you feel a lot of psychological pressure, or it takes some mental energy and time to understand the instructions. So you remove that and you can just go to the exam if you've been preparing in the meantime.
Tim, I'm sorry to interrupt, but can you, never mind. It's right on the next slide. Never mind.
Oh, so what do they stand for?
Yes, the first couple letters, I wasn't sure with each one.
Yeah, I may refer to them as the TOEFL exam or the IELTS exam. That actually might be redundant. You can probably just call it the TOEFL because test is already in there. As you can see, its real name is Test of English as a Foreign Language, TOEFL. That's what they say. And then International English Language Testing System, IELTS. I think the IELTS benefits a lot from having international in it. And in fact, let's take a look. The governing body of the IELTS is not, or actually there's three, they're not American. So the Anglosphere is fairly broad across the world. The TOEFL originated in the United States, and the IELTS originated in those countries which have a greater association with the United Kingdom. So that, I guess, has a larger territorial scope, and that might be one of the reasons why it's becoming more popular. Don't quote me on that. I'm just telling you that its rise to prominence is noticeable. As you can see, the fee, or I should say, as I said, the fee was $250 versus $180. Many Asian students are interested in taking the IELTS exam. Why? Well, you have Australia and New Zealand down here. So that's not the American sphere. That's more of the UK sphere historically. Okay. So the older one, which started it all, was the TOEFL. It was in 1964. The IELTS came later. The governing body is called the Educational Testing Service, whereas you have three components, or I should say governing bodies to the IELTS. British Council, they're responsible for the reputation of British culture worldwide. So that's their interest. Whereas Cambridge Assessment English is more focused on the linguistic side. So it seems to be there was a cooperation between a cultural organization and language organizations to form this younger exam. Okay, but they are basically the same in terms of what they test: listening, reading, writing, speaking, listening, reading, writing, speaking. That's how it is. Now we'll spend a little bit of time on this slide, just so we look at the different components. This is the TOEFL IBT. That's internet-based test. There is a paper-based test. I'll show you a little bit of information on that in a coming slide, but it's falling out of focus because of demand and availability. The internet-based test is probably what will succeed in the future. Okay, so in order of the components, there's a reading section, a listening section, then a mandatory break, then a speaking section, and then a writing section. You can see the content. There's about 3 to 4 passages with 10 questions each. It takes about an hour. It's scored on a scale of 0 to 30. All right, for listening, there's 5 to 7 passages. They're audio passages with 5 to 6 questions each. Again,
Tim, excuse me, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to go out and come back in. There's something major going wrong with my image. So
okay.
I'm gonna come back go out and come back in. I apologize.
Not at all. Go ahead, Larry. We'll see you in a bit.
Okay, I'm not even sure to get out of here. I got a crazy set of images on my screen here. Again, I apologize, but I'll be back as soon as I figure out how to do it. Sorry.
Don't worry about it. You know, I had
Okay.
some technical issues myself today.
Okay. I don't even know how to get out. Okay. Okay, please continue. Ignore me.
Maybe I can kick you out. No, so actually that is true. Today I had some technical issues. Now why? I don't know. So I heard the student's ringtone with these headphones, and then I answered the call, and as soon as that happened, I didn't hear their voice. And I was wondering, is it their issue or my issue? Turns out it was my issue. So in interacting with the web page, somehow that changed my device settings. Why? There's no reason, probably. So, moving on to the break. 10 minutes, you got to take it. Speaking, there's 4 tasks. It's really short, 17 minutes, but that doesn't mean it's less valuable. Still 0 to 30. All right, then writing, there's 2 tasks for a total of 50 minutes, again, 0 to 30. Okay, looking at the IELTS, the order is a little different. There's a listening section, which has, or I should say a listening component, which has 4 sections, 10 questions each, 30 minutes, and I'll tell you about the structure. Everything you have to answer is presented in the same order in the audio. So if there happens to be some disadvantage to you directly transferring the answer to whatever answer sheet they give you, maybe you have scratch paper, and you can just write down whatever you need. I haven't taken the test, so I don't know exactly what it's like. I've taken practice exercises for it, but I haven't taken the actual test. So they give you 10 minutes of transfer time. So maybe you wrote down notes during the audio, and then you can transfer it to the answer sheet after. All right, this is scored on 0 to 9. And those are basically qualitative bands. I'll show you what the qualitative bands mean, but these over here on the TOEFL side are more, I don't want to say objective bands, but if you get a question right, you get points. Whereas on this one, the quality overall of what you say or answer or understand is put into a band of proficiency. Right? You'll see that on the next slide. Okay, reading, 3 sections, various questions, multiple choice, short answer, fill in the chart. So there's no specific number. Right, that takes 60 minutes. Writing, 2 tasks. The first one is about 150 words in 20 minutes, and the next one is 250 words in 40 minutes for a total of 60. And I know what these tasks are, so I'll say them here and you'll see it again. The first task is you have to describe a chart. Maybe you get some kind of graphic, like a diagram of a machine, or maybe a graph of population, and you have to explain the chart. You have to give it an adequate description. All right, Larry's back. How's it going?
Yep, that's fine. Yeah, I'm fine now. Thank you. So I apologize for the interruption.
Yep, no trouble. Okay. If anyone has any questions, you can ask at any time. Don't worry. All right, so we just talked about the writing. So the first task, like I said, you have to describe a chart. Second task, that's more open-ended. Basically, is the IELTS. That means you have to discuss some kind of opinion, choice, or problem, and perhaps provide a solution to the problem. But again, we'll talk about the components more specifically later. Then I put the speaking section separately because you can do it the same day, or you can do it 7 days before or 7 days after. I should say up to 7 days before or 7 days after. It's not as fixed. And that is 3 sections. It's basically a sit-down interview. Okay, again, scored on 0 to 9, only 11 to 14 minutes. So you see the speaking is really short, but it's still valued at the same level as the others. All right, so this is an explanation of the bands of proficiency. So we'll go through each one. This is the IELTS definition of proficiency. Number 9 is expert user. That means that the individual has full operational command of the language, appropriate, accurate, and fluent with complete understanding. If they're at an 8, that's a very good user. I won't go through the full thing. I'll take a sample from each. All right, so say they're a very good user, but not an expert user. What does that mean? It means the individual has fully operational command of the language with only occasional unsystematic inaccuracies and any inappropriacies. Now, when I type that, this is from the IELTS source. The dictionary in the software did not include inappropriacies, but that's what they said. And I think I know what they mean. It's not that it's inaccurate. It's not that it's incorrect or untrue. It's just not what we say. All right, so I've encountered that when I'm talking with the students. Oh, we don't say it that way. I mean, what you said is fine, but we just don't say it that way. Misunderstandings may occur in unfamiliar situations. Handles complex, detailed argumentation well. All right, and then we go through the levels. Let's say we're at a modest user. Has partial command of the language, coping with overall meaning in most situations, though is likely to make many mistakes. Should be able to handle basic communication in own field. And moving down, we'll go to intermittent user because I think this is me in many, I should say in one language, actually 2 languages. No real communication is possible. Except for the most basic information using isolated words or short formulae in familiar situations and to meet immediate needs. Has great difficulty understanding spoken and written English. All right. Then there's non-user, has no ability, but they did try the test. And there's 0, which means, they signed up and then they walked out. All right, so I'll just take a pause. Any questions so far? Any questions about this demarcation of proficiency?
I just have a question. In terms of how they're describing things here, is the grammar very important, or in other words, just an average speaker who's a native English speaker who is not an English teacher? I mean, would we all be expert users, or are there subtleties with grammar that are expected of someone learning a foreign language that are pretty
That's a great question. So apparently getting a 9 is very difficult for anybody. If you do it, that's actually, I could do it. I'm not saying I could. I mean, if I did it and I brought that as a credential to a language school, that would be very good. Right? Even though I'm a native speaker, as a credential, I show I could get a 9. They say, oh, obviously he understands the test. He's an expert user of English, so maybe we should hire him over the next applicant. So just to continue on that, I'll show you the next chart. That's this one. You can see that this is the exact correspondence across several exam systems. The TOEFL score where you only got 2 wrong of all the questions would correspond to a 9. So if you think you can take 120 questions, it's not exact, like you saw, that's not the exact structure. But if you think you can take 120 questions and not get more than 2 wrong, then yes, you will be a 9. If you get more than 2, then you're 8.5. That's apparently how it breaks down.
Tim, you mentioned that part of the TOEFL test, I think part of the other one involves like an oral interview where they have to speak. So that's somewhat subjective, is it not?
So yeah, I'm wondering why the IELTS is becoming more popular. It might be that language in general is subjective. So when describing what does this mean? They got a 657 on TOEFL. That means nothing unless I convert it into something like this. So I'm thinking maybe as a market, I'm not saying they did it for marketing, but as a marketing mechanism, using proficiency bands with the description of what this means, what they can do, makes it more understandable for the student and for the employer, for the university, to know what is their level. So yes, it is subjective. For the interview, they're probably going to put them in one of these. Maybe you have a generous interviewer.
So what is the optimum score, or that's required?
required? Great question. Actually, I didn't put that in there, so I'm glad you asked. It's 7. Right? If you get a 7, that's as high as you need, except for the Columbia School of Journalism. I think that's 8.5. I think they have a very high standard. Like, you have to actually be a master of English to go to that particular school. But that's journalism. So yes, you will be using the language all the time. But everything else, Yale, Harvard, Caltech, everything, it's all 7. Right? So if you can get a 7, that's basically the door. Right? The door opens after 7. 6.5, you're doing pretty good. So I wouldn't worry about that. That's like they say when you look at university admissions for SAT, and they see maybe there is a band, like 25% actually are lower than you might expect, but for some other reason they were admitted. So same thing, if you're doing 6.5, don't give up. That's my advice. But 7 is the official, like, you're in kind of thing.
But if they're using TOEFL, they don't use this scale. They use up to 120, correct?
Exactly. So the correspondence would be here if you can break 94. If you can break 94 in the TOEFL internet-based test, which, like I said, is probably the one you'll be taking, that's the one. That's the line here for good user. This particular column, the CEFR, I forget what that stands for, but this is applied to every language. So for Russian, for example, was the first time I learned about this. I wanted to say, well, what's the top measurement? The top measurement is C2. And I would need C2 to go to the Department of Russian Philology, which is like the understanding and interpretation of the meaning of words across the full history of Russian literature. Right? So that's the only time you would need to be C2. Apparently, Columbia wants you to be C2 for English if you're a journalist with them or coming from their institution. Okay, so that's the correspondence. Let's do some quick notes. The exams were originally designed to be suitable as admission standards for education institutions. So that means the content can be generally described as that which one might encounter in a university textbook, a university lecture, or a conversation between university students, or a university student and a professor. Generally, I'm not saying it's all at an unreachable level, for example. I know for a fact that no specific knowledge is required to answer the questions that would be on the exam. So you might be worried, well, it's a biology text. I don't know anything about biology. Whatever they selected is not going to prevent you from answering the questions. Okay. There is, however, a second variety for the IELTS. That's called the general training. It's much easier because it's for individuals who are seeking employment but not a college degree at one of these American institutions or British institutions, for example. I won't focus on that, though if there was an interesting aspect of that general training option, I'll include it in the following slides. Okay, so at this point, we'll take another pause. Any questions before we move on? All right. So, in-depth side-by-side. We'll talk about the listening section first. So for the TOEFL, there's 2 to 3 conversations, for example, between a student and a professor.
Yeah, that's just.
Each one is only 2.5 to 3 minutes long, so not so long. All right, there's only 5 questions each, and what would they ask you about? The type of question is basically, what's the speaker's purpose? Right, what are the implications of what they said? Or what is the specific detail from this conversation? Right? And after the conversations, there's 5 to 7 lectures. So that's like a monologue, though the professor might ask for student participation. Right, those are 4.5 to 5.5 minutes each. Right, and you get 6 questions for each one. The student is allowed to take notes while they're listening. And like I said before, there's no specialized knowledge required. So don't be tripped up if they use a technical term, because the technical term is basically like a blank. It's a placeholder, right, for whatever you will have to answer or understand from this lecture. Okay, IELTS, 4 sections. Section 1 and 2 are about everyday social situations. Right, section 1 is a conversation. Section 2 is a monologue. Right, sections 3 and 4 are about educational and training situations. And again, section 3 is a conversation and section 4 is a monologue. As I said, the questions are in the same order as the audio. And you do get some time before they start playing the audio, which you'll only hear once. They'll play it once, there's no repeat. But before that, you can look through the questions, maybe frame what you're looking for in your mind beforehand. Reading. All right, for the TOEFL, there's 3 to 4 passages, about 700 words each. So that's greater than a page. So it's fairly long in my opinion. And there's 10 questions each. They might ask about details, maybe inferences from the text. If there's a cause and effect relationship somewhere contained. And these are academic topics for the TOEFL. For example, they might be from a textbook. Right, again, no prior knowledge necessary. The IELTS, there's 3 sections, and the total word count will be in this range. 2,150 words to 2,750 words. Again, it's fairly long. It's about the same, 700 words each, a little more. And there's various questions, multiple choice, short answer, fill in the chart. So they didn't give you a specific number. Academic. So they're taken if it's the academic variety. So not if it's the general training variety. If it's the academic variety, their sources are books, news articles, maybe journals and magazines. If it's the general training, I believe they're simple conversations. Maybe simple reading passages that you can read. Now for writing, if it's the TOEFL, there's 2 tasks. The first one is the integrated task, and that means you're going to read a passage and listen to a speaker talking about the same topic. And the task is you must summarize the points of the audio and then relate them to what you read. That's the task. This is what they said, and I found this to be in disagreement with what I read afterwards, for example. Independent is the next task, and that's write an essay explaining an opinion or choice. Fairly straightforward. In fact, most of the students who are preparing for essays will be preparing with this type. So they'll be writing an essay about some kind of controversial topic, like does advertising for harmful substances like cigarettes and alcohol harm children, and should it be banned in that case, for example? So for the IELTS, there's 2 tasks, whether it's the academic or the general training. Task 1 for the academic, you, like I said, describe a graphic, such as a machine diagram or some kind of graph or table. That takes about 20 minutes, and you have to write 150 words. Task 2 is discuss an argument, opinion, or problem, and possibly provide the solution or a counter to the argument, for example. And your goal is 250 words within 40 minutes. Now, just to compare it with what you might have for general training, this seems to be what we've done with the Literacy Volunteers of Southern Connecticut. Our students typically do a task like this. Write a letter in response to an everyday situation or write an essay about a general topic. Now, here I have, should working hours be decreased, but it could be my story of moving to the United States, for example. So I'm not saying that what we've done with our essays is not at the academic level, but if we've been doing that, it might be time for the students to strive for a different writing exercise, such as interpreting charts or evaluating an opinion, someone else's opinion. That requires some reasoning and the display of the ability to deal with semi-complex reasoning. Okay, so we'll move on to the speaking section. And like I said, this is the shortest section, regardless of if it's the TOEFL or the IELTS. And for the TOEFL, there's 4 tasks. 1 is independent and 3 are integrated. So integrated means probably you're receiving audio and reading at the same time, and you're going to speak about it, or in the past situation was write about it. So for here, task 1 is answering opinion questions. That is independent. So basically, the person you're interacting with will just ask you simple questions, like, what do you think about this? If I remember correctly, it wasn't exactly like the IELTS. In the IELTS, it's more like, what's your name, where are you from, why are you taking the test, and so on. So this is a little less personal. It's more just like, what do you think about this? All right, so let's look at these integrated tasks. Tasks 2 and 4 are similar. You read a short passage and then listen to short audio. Then you answer a question by combining information from the reading and the audio. All right, so task 3, you listen to an academic lecture and then answer a question about what they heard. All right, while this is happening, you can take notes. So the IELTS is a face-to-face interview. There's 3 sections. The first one, just simple introduction. Basically, it's small talk. Then there's something called the long turn. This lasts about 3 to 4 minutes. And what happens is the student is given a card about a topic, and they have time to interpret the card and then prepare something to say. And the goal is that after that 1 minute of preparation, they can speak continuously for 2 minutes. I don't mean continuously without any well-designed structure to what you're saying. You should probably have a beginning and an end. I think last time I talked about the structure for the Toastmasters speeches. Like, they give you like an impromptu topic, and the task is basically you have 2 minutes to speak fluently about this topic. And this is for English speakers, just for fun, who want to practice public speaking in America. But it's basically the same exercise. And when students come to prepare for the IELTS exam, this is the easiest one to replicate. Basically, you just pick a topic for them. Like, you might pull up a list of possible, I don't know, news headlines, and you'll say, well, do you want to talk about immigration? And they say, okay. Right, and then they prepare for 1 minute, and you have your timer on your phone, and they say, okay, 1 minute's up. And then you time them again for 2 minutes and give them feedback. That's the easiest one to do, so it happens fairly frequently. Section 3, it's a discussion or discussions because you go back and forth with the interviewer again about something. It says most likely it's going to be about the same topic in section 2. But those are the 3 sections of the IELTS, right? Small talk, small topic, and some preparation, and then we'll see, can we work with it in a free-form kind of way? And after that, the IELTS examiner assigns you a 0 to a 9. That's the format of the exam. All right, so let's take a pause. From what you saw, do you think you could replicate some of these tasks with your students and make it suitable to their particular level?
Well, in my case, I have had somebody who was tutoring with me for the very purpose of taking the TOEFL. She was a woman from Belgium who was a nurse and couldn't get a job at Yale because her English skills were not good. And she had taken the TOEFL and didn't pass. And then she came to us for tutoring. And what I did was there's lots of sample TOEFL exercises on the internet. And it was not a problem to just keep printing them up and doing them, the different parts of it, the verbal, the writing, the reading comprehension, and so forth. And I've got loads of papers on exercises that come from old TOEFL exams.
Perfect.
And so, it's something that one can do without that much of a problem.
So these were free resources online?
Yes, they're free. If you will look up TOEFL sample questions, there's many resources there for that. You don't have to buy a book or anything.
What is the end of the story? Did she succeed?
Yes, she did. I'm happy to say she succeeded. She had to get a grade of above 80, and she got like a 90 or something. Initially, she got about a 70. But I was with her for about 8 months. But she was working hard on her own, too. I don't take much credit. I structured it. But she was here 8 more months, and I'm sure that had a lot to do with it, too. But she got her job at Yale as a nurse and lived happily ever after.
Perfect. Okay. So, Michelle, I saw you remove your mute also.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I haven't had a student who was looking to take either of these exams, but I could see where the type of exercises would be very useful. And I think especially now that I've been started doing more tutoring through Skype and putting together my own material versus using, the Challenger books. So I could see where, some of these things might be useful to incorporate into my training.
Yes, I agree. Like we said at the beginning, basically it sets a tangible and measurable goal for the students, which directly transfers to employment opportunities or educational opportunities. So the more we do it as tutors, the more prepared we'll be to help other students who are trying to reach these particular goals. All right. Any other questions? So let's go through some quick tips for integrating this into your lessons. As Larry was saying, there are already a lot of pre-designed exercises, worksheets, and even things you can buy available for free or not on the internet. So if you want to directly take something from that and adapt it for your student, I highly recommend it. Though, if the bar is too high, you might have to adapt it a little more. Just to put that into context, the IELTS content, as far as I understand it, is not easy, ever. So they hold it at a certain level, and the test taker has to work with that. If they can get nothing out of it, that's why they get a 1. Right? If they can get 40% out of it, that's why they get a 4. I'm not saying that's the exact conversion, but that's basically how it is. You could do something like that for your student if you wanted, but I might recommend that if they need some kind of structuring, to go through that process. So that brings us to, whatever you do, try to make it as exactly like the exam as possible, and also in testing conditions. So if you can simulate the testing conditions, that's part of preparation. But that brings us to number 2, which is to set a realistic goal and build upon it. Britt was in the inaugural lesson where we talked about the ladder theory of lesson building. So if you design a lesson, the idea is in one template that what you are designing, what you present in the lesson will build on each passing minute. So the first section might be the introduction, the presentation. And the next section might be, I'm looking at like my small camera. I don't even know if I'm on camera. I think I am. The next section might be the easiest exercises. And then the next 10-minute section might be something more complicated. and then even more challenging before you try to do something which is basically without control, right? Something free. That's the theory within one lesson about how you might build up content. But you meet with your student more than once. So you do this training session, and then you do another one, maybe in the same week, maybe not. But what you're doing is every time you're building on it. And if you have the end goal in mind, which is maybe a 7 on the IELTS, and it's equivalent on the TOEFL, you can build backwards for whatever your student needs to go back lesson by lesson so that eventually they will have the skill to get to where they need to be. If you want a more in-depth discussion about that theory, it's basically what I just said, but there's an hour-long video, and you'll see Britt in it. It's on our YouTube channel. The title is Week 2 LVSCT New Tutor Training Theory of Lesson Design. So if you watch that, it will describe how you can build up to a bigger goal. Okay, and if you want to use an alternative lesson design method, there is another video which is about a cycle of a task or writing assignment within one lesson or across several lessons. That's described in a video called The New Tutor Training Week 4 of 5, a project and assignment integration for the LVSCT. So just to briefly go over what that is. The idea is you provide the student with some kind of task, and that's suitable to the writing section of the exam as well as the listening and the reading section. You present them with the task, which is read this and answer these questions. The center, that's the first third of your lesson, basically. The center part, the second third, is where you provide feedback and you clarify mistakes. And you, as a tutor, try to understand and interpret what was the origin of the mistake, or what within the design of the lesson led the student to make this mistake, because that reflects on you. That being done, you ask them to do something similar or exactly the same thing again. Because after you've reviewed it once, you review it again and you learn more. You understand more. If you read a book once, you understand a lot. But if you read it again, you're definitely going to get new ideas the second time. It's the same thing within some kind of learning experience, like a lesson. If you want them to write about something, by all means, let them write it in 20 minutes. And then give them 20 minutes of feedback and coaching. And then have them rewrite it. In that case, they get to directly apply what you just told them into the task they already half organized in their mind. So it's a really good way to structure a lesson. So I recommend you could adapt it to some kind of writing exercise which is suitable to the exam, or any of the others, speaking, reading, or listening. Because with your creativity, it can be done. And I'm happy to say all that's left is just to review what we've done. Right? The two main exams are the TOEFL and IELTS. Does anyone remember what that stands for? Oh, Larry, you're lucky. You don't have your mute on.
Well, yeah,
What does TOEFL stand
TOEFL
for?
is Test of English as a Foreign Language.
Okay. Now someone has to do
I don't know about the
IELTS.
other one.
Someone has to do IELTS. Who's brave?
I'll do.
Right.
Is it International English Language Test Score? Was that
Very
what it
close.
was?
Yeah, everything is good except for the last two. So what do you think T or S could stand for? Testing.
Testing service?
Close.
Maybe system?
System.
No,
Yes.
yeah.
So International English Language Testing System. Right. So there's 4 sections, regardless of which one it is: listening, reading, writing, and speaking, for academic purposes. Unless you're taking the general training IELTS. No, I would recommend you take the academic one. It's the higher goal. All right, scoring across all exams were related, so you could see exactly what they correspond to, regardless of which one you actually take. And we discussed the sections and their contents. And because of that, I think you have an idea of what the tasks are. If not, you can review it. You can buy a book. Let me show you the IELTS book I bought. This is from the same company that makes it. Just one moment. All right, so Cambridge University Press publishes this book. Let me just move the camera so I can see myself, because I don't know if I'm on camera. Right,
You are.
Cool. So here it is. Right, this version might be outdated because I bought this 2 years ago. Almost 2 years ago. Right, and it will give you basically the exact exam. So if you were a student, you would want to buy this book, but since I'm a teacher, I do the same thing. And so, for example, these might give you some basic charts. This is the chart you might have to describe in 150 words, or something more complicated. Anything else? Describing diagrams. So the diagram might be something like that.
Can't really see it in the tiny box because you're screen sharing.
Oh, yes. Too bad. I guess that means you'll have to buy it. So, yeah, that's one example of a resource you can buy. You can reference those. You can get free resources online and adapt them to your particular student. If you want more advice about the lesson designs, I told you the 2 videos. There's probably others. So I highly recommend you watch those. And with that, all set for today. All right, so thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, Tim.
Yeah.
All right, so...